The cold steel of the gun barrel pressed against my temple was the only thing that felt real. Rain lashed against the floor, to ceiling windows of the penthouse, mirroring the storm that had raged inside me for 3 years. My knees were raw, bleeding onto the pristine white marble, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the suffocating weight of betrayal. "Please, Lam," I whispered, my voice a broken rasp. T-A-R-C-I arved hot tracks through the expensive makeup I'd worn to celebrate our anniversary. "I gave you everything. My family's company, my reputation, my—" Liam stood over me, his handsome face twisted into a sneer I had been too blind to see until this very moment. Beside it, wrapped in his arms and ring my grandmother's sapphire necklace, was Chloe, my so-called best friend. She was smiling a serene, victorious expression that made my stomach churn. "You gave us a stepping stone," Liam corrected, his voice smooth and devoid of any remorse. "You were useful. A naive little heiress with a trust fund and a desperate need to be loved. But you're boring now. And Chloe is everything you never were." "She see a rying your air," Chloe purred, resting her hand on her really, their baby bump. Her eyes gleamed with malicious triumph. "It's time you stopped playing house with the wallet and rotted building a real future." The words were a physical blow, an air. They hadn't just stolen my life, they were erasing my legacy. My father's company, the one I had bled to keep afloat after his stroke, was already gone, siphoned away through forged documents and manipulated board votes I had been too trusting to question. Why? The single word felt like swallowing glass. Liam cocked the hammer. The Arplick echoed in the vast. "Because, my dar wife, you're in the way." And accidents happen. The explosion of sound was deafening, but it was quickly swallowed by the thunder outside. There was no pain, only a sudden, cold, and then an abyss of absolute darkness. I was drowning, not in water, but in a sea of memories, regrets, and the metallic taste of blood. I saw my own funeral, spiarously attended. I saw Liam and Chloe lying in my favorite garden. We ring my mother's wedding dress. I saw my father's company go bankrupt, its assets stripped bare. And then, a gasp. Ragged inhalation of air that burned my lungs. My eyes snapped open, sunlight, bright and golden, streamed through familiar curtains. The scent of lavender and expensive fabric softener filled my nose. I was lying in my bed. The one in the guest suite of the Sterling estate, the one I had slept in during the first year of my marriage before Liam convinced me to move into the master suite with him. I sat up so fast the room spun. My hands flew to my temple, smooth skin. No bullet hole. I stared at my palm, trembling uncontrollably. They were unblemished, the calluses from years of piano practice still faintly visible. I scrambled out of bed, my legs feeling like jelly, and ran to the en-suite bathroom. I gripped the edges of the marble sink and stared into the mirror. The face staring back was younger, softer. The hollows under my eyes, the permanent lines of stress and sorrow that had etched themselves into my skin over the last 3 years, were gone. My hair was longer, sheenier, falling in waves past my shoulders. I looked at the digital calendar on the vanity. October 15, 3 years ago, the day of our engagement. Rotty. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat, but I clamped a hand over my mouth, silencing it. I wasn't crazy, I was alive. I had been given a second chance, a miracle wrapped in a nightmare. The doorbell chimed, a cheerful, melodic sound that now felt like a running siren. My phone, resting on the counter, lit up with a text message. "Lime. Can't wait to see you tonight, my love. Everything is going to be perfect." My blood ran cold, then boiled with a fury so intense it felt like a physical force. Perfect. He was going to announce our engagement tonight, cementing his claim to my family's fortune and setting the stage for my eventual destruction. In my past, I had cried tears of joy when I read that text. I had believed every word. Not anymore. The naive, lovesick girl who had written that reply was dead. She had died on a marble floor, betrayed by the two people she trusted most. I stared at my reflection, watching the softness in my eyes rot into something sharp and unyielding. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my chest, but it was being forged into something else. Resolve, clarity. I picked up the phone. My fingers, no longer trembling, moved with deliberate precision across the screen. I didn't type "I love you." I didn't use a single heart emoji. Alina looking for a art to it. "We have much to discuss." I set the phone down and turned back to the mirror. The woman's ring back was a stranger, yet she was more me than I had ever been. Liam thought he was riding a pawn. Chloe thought she was stepping into a crown. They had no idea they were inviting a storm into their carefully constructed house of cards. I would not stop them. I would not scream or accuse. I would smile and play the PA art of the devoted fiancé. Right up until the moment I pulled the foundation out from under them. I reached for my hairbrush, my movements calm and methodical. Tonight was not a celebration. It was the opening move in a doe AR, and this time, I would be the one holding the gun. The emerald silk whispered against my skin as I descended the grand staircase. The fabric cool and heavy, a stark contrast to the burning resolve in my chest. The ballroom below was a kaleidoscope of swirling gowns and Sharp tuxedos, a sea of faces that had once been my entire world. Tonight, they were merely pieces on a chessboard. I paused at the bottom step, allowing my gaze to sweep the room. There, near the champagne fountain, stood my mother, her posture rigid, her smile tight and strained. She was wearing the vintage Reborn brooch I had given her last Christmas. The one she had claimed was too precious to wear. In my path, I would have rushed to her side, eager for her approval, oblivious to the way her eyes constantly derided Liam's mother, seeking validation from the woman who had always treated me like an inconvenient acquisition. Tonight, I merely noted her presence, a silent acknowledgement of the family that had spent decades treating my love as a currency to be spent. My eyes found Liam next. He was holding Courtney the terrace doors, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, his head thrown back in a practiced laugh. He looked every inch the perfect fiancé, handsome, confident, utterly at ease. The sight of him sent a phantom ache through my temple, a ghost of the bullet that had ended my first life. I pushed the memory down, locking it away in a steel vault. He was not the man I had loved. He was the architect of my destruction, and tonight, I would begin dismantling his blueprint. As if sensing my gaze, he turned. His smile shifted, softening into that practiced expression of adoration he reserved for public consumption. He excused himself from his conversation and crossed the room, his movements fluid and assured. He murmured, taking my hand and pressing a kiss to my knuckles. His lips were dewy, his breath familiar, but his eyes were calculating. You look striking. The word was a subtle dig. In our 3 years together, he had never praised my boldness. He had preferred me in pastels and silks, a soft, agreeable presence beside him. Emerald was a color of power, of ambition, of a woman who did not need to be protected. Thank you, Liam, I replied, my voice a melodic purr. I felt it was time for a change. His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. He had expected the blush pink gown, the demure jewelry, the girl who would smile and nod and let him steer the evening. Instead, he was standing beside a woman who was already rewriting the script. You're nervous, he observed, his thumb stroking the back of my hand in a gesture meant to appear comforting. It's all right, tonight is a big step. I let him believe it. Let him think my silence was anxiety, my stillness was fear. I'm exactly where I need to be, I assured him, meeting his gaze with a serene smile. He led me toward the center of the room, where a small stage had been erected. The string quartet faded to a soft hum as he took the microphone. The room fell silent, hundreds of expectant faces turning toward us. Friends, family, colleagues, Liam began, his voice rich and newer, a masterful performance. Tonight is a celebration of love, partnership, of a future built on trust and red dreams. Each word was a lie, polished and gleaming. I stood beside him, my hand resting lightly on his arm, my face a portrait of blissful devotion. Inside I was taking inventory. Every person in this room who had ever dismissed me, overlooked me, or used me. Every person who would soon be watching my ascension. Elena has been my rock, my confidante, my greatest supporter, Liam continued, turning to me with an expression of profound tenderness. And tonight, I want to make a promise that I will always honor, protect, and cherish her. The applause began, a wave of sound that washed over us. But before it could fully crest, I raised a hand. The gesture was small, elegant, but it carried an authority that silenced the room. Liam's smile faltered, his eyes widening in surprise. This was not in his carefully rehearsed speech. I said, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone he still held. Your words are everything I could have hoped for. But a partnership is not built on promises alone. It is built on transparency. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Liam's grip on the microphone tightened, his knuckles whitening. He had no idea what was coming. As many of you know, my father's health has been a source of concern, I continued, my tone gentle but firm. For the past 2 years, Liam has graciously assisted in managing the affairs of Vance Enterprises. He has done so with dedication and sincerity. I paused, allowing the compliment to hang in the air, a honey trap. But the time has come for me to take a more active role. Effective immediately, I have assumed the position of Chief Executive Officer. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence of shock, of recalibration, of 100 minds suddenly reassessing the woman in the emerald dress. Liam's face was a mask of controlled fury. He had not been consulted. He had not been warned. The announcement was a public declaration of independence, a line drawn in the sand that he could not cross without losing face. I turned to him, my eyes wide with feigned innocence. "I hope you don't mind?" I whispered, loud enough for the front rows to hear. I wanted us to begin our marriage as true equals, with complete transparency. He had no choice. In front of the city's elite, he could not contradict me without revealing his own ambition or his lack of control. He forced a smile, a brittle, strained expression that did not reach his eyes. "Of course, my darling," he managed, his voice tight. "Your father would be proud." The applause resumed, but it was different now. It was tinged with curiosity, with a new, wry respect. I was no longer just Liam Sterling's fiancée. I was Alina Vance, CEO of Vance Enterprises. As the music swelled and he led me onto the dance floor, his grip was no longer possessive. It was desperate. "What was that?" he hissed through his smile as we began to waltz. I met his gaze, my own eyes clear and unflinching. "It was a promise, Liam," I whispered, my voice a silken threat. "A promise that our future will be built on a foundation of truth. Don't you agree?" His jaw clenched, a muscle ticking in his cheek. He was recalibrating, trying to understand the new rules of a game he thought he had already won. Across the room, I caught Chloe's eye. She was standing near the bar, her champagne flute frozen halfway to her lips. Her serene smile was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. She had expected a naive girl to be led to the altar. Instead, she was staring at a woman who had just redrawn the map of her entire world. I smiled back, a genuine, chilling curve of my lips. The first act was over. The real performance was just beginning. As the dance ended and Liam escorted me to our table, his mind clear while I racing with damage control, I allowed my gaze to drift to the far corner of the ballroom. There, half hidden in the shadows near the terrace doors, stood a man. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin. His dark hair was swept back, revealing a strong jaw and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He was not applauding. He was not smiling. He was watching me with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. Julian Thorne. I had not expected him to be here. He rarely attended social functions, preferring the quiet power of his office to the glittering charade of high society. Yet here he was, a silent observer in a room full of performers. Our eyes met across the crowded ballroom. There was no greeting, no acknowledgement. Just a moment of profound, electric recognition. He saw me. Not the heiress, not the fiancée, not the CEO. He saw the woman beneath the emerald silk, the woman who had just declared red war on her own life. And in his gaze, I saw something I had not felt in 3 years, not since before the betrayal, not since before the bullet. I saw understanding. He gave the slightest nod, almost imperceptible, before turning and melting back into the shadows. I turned back to Liam, who was still trying to compose his features into a convincing smile. "Are you all right, my love?" I asked, my voice dripping with concern. "You seem tense." "I'm fine," he replied, his voice clipped. "Just surprised." "Surprise can be a good thing," I murmured, my fingers tracing the lapel of his jacket. "It means the future is still unwritten." He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He was beginning to realize that the woman he had planned to discard was no longer the woman he had planned to marry. The band began a new song, a slow, haunting melody that seemed to underscore the shift in the room's atmosphere. I took Liam's hand and led him back to the dance floor, my movements graceful, my expression serene, but inside, a fire was burning. A fire fueled by the memory of rain, slick to marble and the taste of ashes. A fire that would consume everything they had built, brick by treacherous brick. Tonight I had drawn the first line. Tomorrow I would begin to build my fortress. And Julian Thorne, the man in the shadows, had just become the most dangerous variable in my equation. The game had changed, and this time, I was the one holding the pieces. The morning sun offered no earth, only a unforgiving glare that illuminated the wreckage of Liam's carefully constructed morning routine. I sat at the head of the long mahogany dining table, the morning light catching the sharp angles of my tailored cream pantsuit. The silence in the penthouse was absolute, a stark contrast to the chaotic, suffocating tension that had defined our breakfasts in my previous life. Back then, I would have been a nervous wreck, apologizing for my presence, desperately trying to soothe his bruised ego. Today I was a fortress. Liam sat opposite me, his coffee untouched, the dark liquid cooling in the fine china cup. The veins in his neck pulsed with a rhythm of relay-contained rage. He had spent the entire night pacing, the ghost of my public declaration haunting him. He was a man who had always held the reins, and I had just publicly snatched them from his grip. Elena, he finally broke the silence, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He leaned forward, attempting to reclaim the physical space between us. We need to discuss this impulsive stunt you pulled last night. You cannot simply declare yourself CEO without a board vote. It's unprecedented. It makes us look unstable. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea, savoring the wrath and the profound sense of control. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I simply watched him unravel. It is not impulsive, Liam. It is necessary, I replied. My voice is smooth and unyielding as polished glass. My father's health is a matter of public record. The market requires stability, not the illusion of it. By making the transition of power clear and immediate, I have prevented speculation. I have secured our foundation. Your foundation. He let out a raucous, disbelieving laugh, his handsome face twisting into a sneer. Elena, you are Vance by birth, but you are Sterling by marriage. Your role is to support this family, not to dictate its business affairs. You are playing a dangerous game. The old Elena would have crumbled at that tone. She would have wrathfully apologized, begging for his approval, terrified of losing his love. But the woman sitting across from him had died on a marble floor, her blood pooling. The morning sun sliced through the floor to ceiling windows of the Sterling penthouse, casting sharp shadows across the pristine white marble. The silence in the appartement was heavy, suffocating, and entirely deliberate. Liam had not spoken a single word since we returned from the gala. He sat at the head of the glass dining table, his posture rigid, a cup of black coffee untouched and growing cold before him. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle ticking beneath his skin. He was a man who had woken up to find his kingdom suddenly on fire, and he was desperately trying to figure out who had struck the match. I sat opposite, perfectly composed in a tailored cream pantsuit, sipping my Earl Grey tea. The emerald silk of last night had been replaced by armor of a different kind. I watched him over the rim of my cup, savoring the exquisite tension in the air. In my past life, mornings like this would have been filled with my frantic apologies, my desperate attempts to soothe his bruised ego and explain away my foolish impulsiveness. I would have cried, begged, and promised to defer to his superior business judgment. Today, I was the eye of the storm. Elena, Lim finally broke the silence, his voice a dangerous rasp that barely concealed his fury. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. We need to talk about last night. Your little performance. I prefer to think of it as a strategic realignment, Lean, I replied smoothly, setting my teacup down with a soft clink. And it wasn't a performance. It was a necessary corporate restructuring. A restructuring? He let out a rash, disbelieving laugh, his blue eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and condescension. You don't restructure a company by ambushing your fiancé in front of 300 investors. You don't take unilateral control of a portfolio you've happily let me manage for 2 years. What is this? A power play? Are you trying to prove something to me? He was trying to frame me as an emotional, hysterical woman throwing a tantrum. It was the oldest trick in the patriarchal playbook, and I had fallen for it 1,000 times before. But the woman who had died on a marble floor had left her naivety behind in the grave. I am proving something to the board, Liam, and to them Arquette, I corrected. My tone as COO and detached as a surgeon discussing a procedure. Vance Enterprises has been hemorrhaging capital under your management. The quarterly reports are riddled with creative accounting and unauthorized consulting fees. I am simply correcting the course. The color drained from his face. The confident, arrogant mask slipped, revealing a flash of genuine, unadulterated panic. He hadn't expected me to know. He had expected the audit to be a mere formality, something he could easily manipulate or bury. You hired an independent forensic accounting firm, he whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. I did, I confirmed, my gaze unwavering. Blackwood and Associates. They are exceptionally thorough. Their preliminary report lands on my desk at noon. Stay read at me, his chest rising and falling rapidly as his mind raced. He was doing the math, realizing that the money he had siphoned off to fund his secret life with Chloe was now a ring. Undeniable crime, he was trapped. Before he could formulate a defense, the heavy oak door of the penthouse swung open. Chloe breezed in, carrying a pink bakery box, and we ring a smile that was supposed to be bright and supportive. She was dressed in a soft, oversized cashmere sweater, deliberately playing the role of the innocent, domestic best friend. Good morning, she chimed, her voice echoing in the tense room. I brought your favorite croissants, Elena. I thought you might need a comfort breakfast after such a big, stressful night. She stopped, her eyes rotting between Liam's furious, pale face and my serene, impassive expression. The air in the room was thick with hostility, and her cheerful facade faltered. She sensed the blood in the water, but she didn't understand the predator that had drawn it. Liam snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of wounded confusion. She set the box down on the counter, her eyes locking onto mine, silently pleading for me to intervene, to play the peacemaker as I always had. Alana, is everything okay? Did I do something wrong? In my past life, I would have rushed to reassure her, blaming Liam's stress and apologizing for the tension. I would have protected her feelings at the expense of my own sanity. I took a slow sip of my tea, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. Actually, Chloe, I'm glad you're here, I said, my voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Since you're so involved in our personal and professional lives, you should know. I've officially taken over as CEO of Vance Enterprises. Liam is no longer authorized to make any financial decisions on my behalf. Chloe's eyes widened, her gaze snapping to Liam. He was staring at the table, his hands curled into fists. She saw the defeat in his posture, the absolute lack of control. The realization that her golden ticket was suddenly worthless hit her like a slap. The smug, victorious woman from the penthouse floor in my previous life was gone, replaced by a terrified girl who had just realized she had bet on the wrong horse. I see, Chloe stammered, her voice trembling. She looked at me, watching for a trace of the old, gullible Elena. She found nothing but a polished mirror reflecting her own deceit. Good, I said brightly, standing up and smoothing the front of my suit. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with Julian Thorne at 10. We have a great deal of business to discuss. The name dropped into the room like a grenade. Liam's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. Thorne? You're meeting Julian Thorne? Julian Thorne was a ghost in our social circle. He was a billionaire private equity titan who moved in circles far above Liam's pretentious, ridden world. He was known for acquiring distressed assets and ruthlessly dismantling the executives who had mismanaged them. He was the exact kind of Shark Liam had always pretended to be, but never actually was. Yes, I replied, picking up my leather briefcase. Thorne Capital is taking a significant equity stake in Vance Enterprises. Miss Thorne and I have reached an agreement regarding the cleanup of my company. I walked toward the door, my heels clicking rhythmically against the marble. I paused, glancing back over my shoulder at the two people who had murdered me. They were sitting in the ruins of their own arrogance, realized by the sudden, violent shift in power. Oh, and Liam, I added, my voice soft, almost tender. When Blackwood and Associates finishes their report at noon, I suggest you have a very good lawyer on speed dial. You're gonna need one. I stepped out of the penthouse and let the heavy door click shut behind me. The silence of the hallway was a symphony. My heart was beating a steady, powerful rhythm against my ribs. There was no guilt, no hesitation. No lingering attachment to the man I had once called my husband. As I stepped into the private elevator, I pulled out my phone. A single text message glowed on the screen. My office, 10:00 a.m. We are your arm is Vance. A slow, genuine smile touched my lips. The first fracture had been made. Now, it was time to shatter the glass completely. The rain lashed against the floor, to ceiling windows of the penthouse, a rhythmic, violent drumming that perfectly mirrored the storm raging inside the room. It was exactly the same weather, the same city, the same suffocating silence as the night I had died. But this time, I was not on my knees, I was standing. Liam sat slumped in the leather arm chair, his face buried in his hands. The polished, arrogant veneer was completely gone, stripped away by the relentless barrage of evidence I had laid out over the past 6 months. On the glass coffee table between us sat a thick, leather-bound folder. The preliminary audit from Blackwood and Associates. It was the final nail in the coffin, a meticulous, undeniable chronicle of his embezzlement, his forged signatures, and his desperate, pathetic attempts to hide his tracks. Beside him sat Chloe. She was trembling, her mascara running in d'arc, jagged streaks down her cheeks. The sapphire necklace, the one she had worn with such smug, triumphant pride on the night of my murder, was gone. I had reclaimed it from the pawn shop where Liam had frantically tried to liquidate it to pay off his mounting legal debts. It was currently resting in my pocket, a cold, heavy reminder of the cycle that had finally been broken. You're gonna prison, Liam, I said, my voice be a relay above a whisper. Yet it ca ride the weight of a judge's gavel, and clo. As an accessory to fraud and conspiracy, you won't be far behind. Liam finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, hollowed out by the realization of his absolute ruin. He stared at me, ca watching for a trace of the girl who had loved him blindly, the girl who would have forgiven anything for a scrap of affection. Elena, please, he choked out, his voice a broken rasp. We can fix this. We can pay it back. Just don't destroy us. I'm not destroying you, I replied, my tone as smooth and unyielding as the marble floor beneath my heels. I am merely allowing the consequences of your own actions to catch up with you. You built your life on my blindness. Now, you get to live in the dark. I turned my gaze to Chloe. And you? You wanted my life so badly. You wanted the crown, the wealth, the man. I offered her a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I hope the view from the bottom is exactly what you imagined. The heavy oak door opened, and 2 federal agents stepped into the room, their expressions grim and professional. They didn't need to speak. The reading of their rights was a dull, mechanical recitation that washed over me without touching me. As they led Liam and Chloe away in handcuffs, Chloe let out a shattered sob, but Liam didn't look back. He couldn't. He was too busy staring at the ghost of the woman he had tried to erase. When the door clicked shut, the silence that followed was not heavy. It was expansive. It was the sound of a cage door swinging open. I walked over to the window, looking out at the glittering city below. The storm was breaking, the dark clouds fracturing to reveal the pale, golden light of dawn. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the sapphire necklace. The stones were cold, heavy with the weight of a past life. For a moment I held it, feeling the phantom echo of the bullet that had ended my first existence. Then, with a steady hand, I dropped it into the crystal ashtray on the windowsill. It landed with a dull, final clink. I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need any of it. The girl who had died for love was gone. The woman who remained was forged in the fire of her own resurrection. A soft footstep sounded behind me. I didn't flinch. I knew exactly who it was. Julian Thorne stepped up beside me, his tall frame a quiet, solid presence in the vast room. He didn't say a word. He simply stood beside me, his shoulder brushing mine, his presence a silent testament to the alliance we had built from the ashes of my ruin. He had been the shadow in the corner of the ballroom, the silent P.A. Rotner in the Board room, the one man who had seen the storm inside me and hadn't tried to weather it, but had simply offered me the lightning. It's over, he murmured, his deep voice a low rumble that resonated in the quiet space. I corrected softly, turning my head to look at him. The storm gray of his eyes met mine, and in them, I saw the reflection of a woman who was finally, truly free. The WR is over, Julian. The life is just beginning. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind my AR. The touch was electric, a stark contrast to the cold, possessive grips of my past. This was not ownership. This was Pierrotnership. This was a choice. Then let's begin, he whispered. I turned back to the window, watching the first rays of the sun pierce the horizon, painting the city in shades of gold and crimson. The rain had washed the streets clean, leaving the world glistening and new. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the crisp morning air. The taste of ashes was gone. In its place was the sharp, intoxicating scent of victory and the quiet, steady promise of a future I had built with my own 2 hands. I was no longer a pawn. I was no longer a victim. I was Alina Vance. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I was exactly where I was meant to be.